Shellye, it's a privilege to have you on the podcast. Thank you for being here.
Absolutely. I've been looking forward to it, Shreya.
Shellye, I have gone through everything that is on the web about you, and one thing that resonated with me the most was that early on in your life, you knew what you wanted to be. And when I was a teenager, I also knew that I wanted to go to Wall Street in this finance job, and I did everything in my power to go to UBS in New York, which actually my parents still believe is my greatest achievement in life. Uh, but your example actually shows us what you believe about yourself largely determines what you end up becoming in your life beyond just pure talent. Um, Shellye, we know about your career trajectory and we will definitely double click on it in this podcast. But I do want to start with the small conversation on your most recent book, which is Unapologetically Ambitious. How do you know when a woman is unapologetically ambitious like you?
How do you know? It's interesting. At first, you have to, if you said double click on the word ambition. So, what is ambition?
Hmm.
And to me, ambition just means that there is something in the future that you are intentionally working towards,
Yeah.
right? So, you have a goal or an objective, and you're intentionally making decisions and steps to get there. To me, that's ambition. So, how do you know somebody's ambitious? If they have something they are working towards. And unfortunately, too many times the word ambition is seen as a negative when it comes to women. Matter of fact, I had a woman just tell me yesterday, I had a speech, and afterwards she came up to me and said, I've been told that ambition isn't attractive in a woman. And I was like, really? It's 2024. And we are still at that point. So the bottom line is everyone deserves to be ambitious, Shreya. I mean, you would never tell a child that you were raising, work hard, get good grades, get involved, build your leadership skills, show initiative, but don't be ambitious. I mean, what? Right? Everyone should have something that they are striving to create, to build, to impact, to help, right? To create, whatever it happens to be. Everybody should. So we've got to get past this point about, oh, women shouldn't be ambitious. It's okay for men. No, everyone should be ambitious.
Yeah. And then how do you really spot this ambition in people? Um,
You look for the spark,
you,
right? You look for the spark. When I ask people, so, what do you want to do? Or what, the first reaction is typically, oh, I don't know.
mm,
And it's not that they don't know. Many people are just afraid to share what it is. They're
mm,
afraid to speak it out loud. So
mm,
most of us have something deep down that we want to do or want to create or want to build, right? And I don't care if the horizon is 2 years, 5 years, 50 years, right? But something. And many times it's just giving them the opportunity to communicate it, right? To share it. So I believe everybody has ambition. Otherwise, why do you get out of bed?
right?
I mean,
Yeah.
literally, why do you get out of bed if you're not getting out of bed to actually do something? And
Right.
you're
Right.
doing that something to enable, support, whatever it might be, the next thing. So everyone has ambition.
Right. And where does one start? Say, for example, everyone, as you said, everyone has somewhere to go to. Everyone is
Mhm.
thinking about something. But say for people who are not really laying out plans yet, where do they start?
Yeah. So to me, you start with that goal. Once you admit to yourself what it actually is,
Hmm.
right? That is then your goal.
Hmm.
All right. And that goal can be anything. I want to be a painter. We were talking about your niece before the show started. I want to open up a bakery, right? Or I want to be a CEO, or I want to be a scientist. I mean, it doesn't matter. Whatever that happens to be, right? That now becomes your goal. So the
Hmm.
first question you ask yourself is,
What is
what has to be true for me to do it?
right?
That's
Yeah.
what I always ask myself. What has to be true? And for me, Shreya, just a bit of a backstory, then I'll use my example as the story. But when I was in high school, right, in the US in high school, you have that obligatory conversation in your junior year with the guidance counselor.
Right.
And the question is, are you going to college? Right? And my answer was yes. My father didn't have a college degree. In my household, it was get good grades so you can go to college. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then she said, well, what do you want to do after college?
Hmm.
And I was like, honestly, I don't know. I just want a job that pays enough so that I can keep my thermostat at 72 degrees in the wintertime, that I can eat out in restaurants and I can travel. Because those were all things I couldn't do. Right. And she kind of laughed, but then she realized I was dead serious.
Yeah.
And so she said, okay. And I give her credit because you say, where do you start with somebody? I give her credit. She said, well, what do you like to do?
Yeah.
That was easy. Clubs. I was in everything: American Field Service, French Club, National Honor Society. I was even a Girl Scout, right? But I didn't tell anybody because that wasn't cool in high school. And I liked leading those things. And she said, well, business is like clubs. You pull people together and you get things done. So I said, great. I'll go into business, and I liked running clubs, so I'll go run a business. And so that's why I looked up, and those people were called CEOs. And I said, fine, I'll go be a CEO. It was that audacious and that naive. Did I know what a CEO actually did? Oh, right. But now I had a goal. So
Right.
then it was, all right, if that's what I want to do, what has to be true?
Right.
Right. And that's when you have to do your research. And the research was, well, who are these CEOs? And this is back in the early 80s. And the CEOs, honestly, were all men. And I said, all right, so aren't many women. I don't see any people of color. I'm like, oh my gosh. So odds aren't in my favor, which is not unusual. So how do I improve the odds? And I said, all right, well, I need a degree from a top tier school. So that'll give me credential, right? So I picked Wharton, and that's where I applied, and that's where I went. And then I had heard along the way that if you pick industries that are growing, opportunities tend to be more frequent and more often, and you can move farther faster. So I said, all right, tech was hot. I picked tech. I literally just picked it. It wasn't because I loved technology. I just picked the industry. So I picked tech. And then I picked IBM because IBM was the leader in that area. So I said, great, I'll go to IBM. I'll become CEO. Boom.
Yeah.
Right. But literally, what has to be true then helps you figure out your plan. I joined IBM, and there's like 120,000 employees. And I'm thinking, oh my God, they all want to be CEO. Right. So, well, who are the CEOs and what jobs did they have? And it turned out every single CEO at IBM started out in sales.
Mm.
So, what has to be true? I said, fine, I guess I have to start out in sales. Now,
Right.
I didn't take a sales job because I thought, oh, I love sales,
Yeah.
right? I want to be a salesperson. No, I took it because I said, that's a set of skills and experience I need,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? So don't worry about each job being, quote, the perfect job.
Yeah.
No, the job you're taking is the job to get you skills so that you can get the next job. You want to
Yeah.
get in and out of jobs as quickly as possible. Don't worry about optimizing the job. You're
Yeah.
trying to optimize the career,
Mm.
right?
Right.
So, what's the goal? What has to be true to achieve the goal?
Right.
Do the research, and that then gives you the plan.
Yeah.
And then you just start executing on the steps and figuring out, how can I improve my odds? Right? How can I improve my odds every step of the way?
Yeah.
And that's, we talked about the book. That's what Unapologetically is all about. It's a book about how to improve your odds every step of the way.
I think then you spoke about IBM and wanted to double click on your experience there. So you wanted to become the CEO, and you quit as you did not find yourself going in that direction. But this is also when you realized that becoming the CEO was a bigger goal. So I think I'm very curious as to why didn't you start your own company at the time?
Honestly, I didn't even realize it was an option. I grew
Mm.
up on the East Coast.
Mm.
East Coast wasn't the bastion of entrepreneurship that you
Right.
have in a Bangalore or a Silicon Valley, right? Or the other places. So I didn't even think about starting my own.
Yeah.
It was one of those things where I didn't even see it as an option. I
Mm.
thought the best way to run a company was to join a company and grow to become, right, the CEO. Really didn't get a handle and a perspective on startups until later in my career.
Right. And then you joined Blockbuster. So you were the president of Blockbuster and you realized that it might not grow further. So I'm actually curious, when does it become obvious that a company or an industry is about to get disrupted?
It never becomes, quote, obvious, right,
Mm.
until it actually happens.
Mm.
But what happened at Blockbuster is more of signals. So I was
Right.
hired to be president of blockbuster.com to build out the .com website, et cetera. And as we went forward, I'm trying to build technology in a company that had an amazing business. Back in the 1990s, Blockbuster almost printed money. They had stores within like 3 miles of most Americans. They were the behemoth. But then there was this startup called Netflix, and they had technology, but they didn't have any of the industry relationships, right, or any of those things. And the CEO I met, Reed Hastings, we met each other at conferences and at things. We got together a few times, and he came out to Blockbuster and basically pitched, let's say blockbuster.com, the brand, Netflix, the technology, let's put them together and, go conquer the world. And my boss was like, if that ever turns into anything, we'll just buy it then, right?
Mm.
So now looking back at it, you say, oh my God, it's obvious they should have done that, right?
Yeah.
But at the time, not necessarily. I mean, Blockbuster, as I said, was the behemoth, and Netflix was this little startup.
Yeah.
So it's understandable, but it's those kinds of decisions that can, make or break a company, later. And for me, I was focused on the technology side, and I looked at that and said, right, if I'm really going to do technology, I need to within tech, right?
Right.
Not within another company. And that's why I moved myself to Silicon Valley, because it was clear that Blockbuster really wasn't going to get the tech right.
Right. And how did you sort of analyze at the time? Did you do a deep dive into the pros and cons, and or were you only focused on, okay, I'll just go where technology takes me?
Oh, no, no, no. I was very intentional. I
Right.
remember coming home and having a conversation with my late husband about it, because we had just moved the whole family. I mean, when
Right.
I came to this conclusion, it was only like 9 months into my job at at Netflix, and we had just moved from Tokyo, Japan, to Dallas for this job. And I come home and I tell him, I don't think this is actually going to be what we expected, and I need to look. Right? It was like, he's like, what? We just got here. And so it was definitely intentional, and it was pros and cons. It's like, okay, if I stay, what does that mean?
Right.
And what does that give me? And how does this position me for becoming a CEO, which is what I ultimately wanted to do,
Yeah.
versus if I leave for a role that positions me better, right, for what I'm trying to do. So absolutely, I always do the pros and cons, and I'm always intentional about taking steps, because
Right.
what I find is you don't want to run away from something. I see
Mm.
too many people take new jobs because they're just trying to get out of their current situation.
Right.
So therefore, I call that running away from something. And
Yeah.
when you're running away from something, anything looks good because
Mm.
it looks better than what you're running from.
Yeah.
And next thing you know, you end up at a spot that frankly may or may not be good.
Right.
Much better to run to something. So
Yeah.
whatever situation you're in, stay there until
Mm.
you figure out, what is it you want? What's the best way to get it? Be intentional. Now look for what you want and then go after what you want, because
Mm.
then the odds are going to be so much higher
Right.
that the next job you take will be a better one for you. It'll position you better, it'll be the right one you want, it'll be etc. But I see too many people run from one thing, land in another, and they're not happy there either, because they didn't take the time to be intentional about their steps.
Right. And what's your perspective on taking a break while you're deciding where to get to next?
Honestly, it depends on where you are and what you're doing. When you
Yeah.
say take a break to decide, I do find it's easier to find a job when you have a job.
Right. Right.
So I wouldn't just say to myself, oh, I want to do something different. So let me just stop what I'm doing now,
Mm.
right? Be unemployed for a while, think about it, and then go after something. Because
Right.
what that looks like to the next person you're interviewing with is that you are, frankly, not very either decisive. They'll find, I mean, there's a lot of question marks that leads. It's like, well, did you really leave on your own accord? Did you leave because they asked you to leave, right? When you have these gaps. So early in your career,
Yeah.
right? I don't usually advise that. I'm like, no, figure it out right before you make the change.
Yeah.
Now, later in your career, once you actually are established, you are known for a certain set of skills, capabilities, you've got a reputation, et cetera. Then you can take a break, because
Mm.
people know, right, based on track record, I think what you've done, and
Right.
people understand that. But early in your career, when you take the breaks, it doesn't look as good because you're not as established.
Yeah. Yeah. So after Blockbuster, you joined Northpoint as the CMO and EVP of sales. And you joined Northpoint when Verizon agreed to acquire the company. However, Verizon didn't, I mean, the transaction did not go through. So how did you and your team respond to that situation?
Oh, yes, that was a challenging one. So I joined a company thinking, oh, this is going to be the leader in, at the time, it's called DSL, really dating myself, high speed internet access. And then, Verizon basically reneges on the deal, and it puts North Point in a really challenged position. So, how do we react? I will tell you, most of the leaders, not all, but most of the senior leadership team actually, I'll call it doubled down to make sure that we actually managed North Point, managed our customers, helped our employees in the best way possible.
Right.
Some people just left, right? They quit.
Wow.
But it tells you a lot about leadership, um, when people actually work through the hard times, right? As well as the good times. So you learn a lot about people and things there. And frankly, people see what you're made of. And it's a
Right.
result of that experience that I got pulled into the next one.
Mm.
Was a investor at North Point, was also an investor at Loud Cloud,
Right.
and saw all that I'd done and went, I want you here, right? As well.
Yeah.
So I tell people all the time, listen, there is more to be learned during times of challenge than there is during times of positive, easy growth, because growth hides a lot of issues. So when growth stops, all of a sudden all the issues become real, and you've got to learn how to deal with those things. So if you never go through hard times, you're never going to actually be able to scale something, because
Mm.
there isn't a company out there in the world whose trajectory looks like this.
Yeah.
Revenue up every single year. It just doesn't.
Yeah.
So therefore, you want to make sure that you actually stick to something, work through challenging times, take those learnings. You'll be a much better leader later.
Yeah. And speaking about the hard times, at the time of North Point's sale to AT&T, there was obviously, a dot-com crash. What did you learn about the market then? And do you think that there are a few leading indicators in such markets, or have you seen any similar trend in any market recently?
Oh, I mean, yes. What happens is the market, in many ways, is a bit of a herd mentality,
Mm.
right? So something good is seen, and oh, everybody's got to get into it. So as a result, you always end up with these bubbles,
Mm.
right? That happen where things get a bit overhyped, they get overpaid, they get overinvested, they get over the whole bit, and then you have a weeding out period. That is so typical and frankly normal.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's really, really bad, like the dot-com crash where the bubble just became right ridiculous. But most times it's, in industries or in sectors. And so you don't see it as a whole market crash. You just see little industries, right? Get right-sized, et cetera. So does
Right.
that happen? Absolutely. And I think it's Warren Buffett that actually says, the time to be optimistic is when others are pessimistic, right? And
Huh.
the time to be pessimistic or when others are optimistic in terms of looking for opportunities. And I'm paraphrasing incorrectly, but you get the gist.
Yes.
And so when you say, do we see things now? Yeah, I mean, in many ways, generative AI is like exploding. So any company that says no name company.ai seems to be able to raise money, right? And do things. Well, that's okay. A lot of money goes out with the expectation of half of that isn't going to work,
Yeah.
right? But a
Yeah.
good chunk of it will. So you want to make sure you get in there and you get balanced. As an investor, as long as you have a balanced approach to it, you'll have some winners, you'll have some losers.
Yeah.
But if you're single threaded, just realize you have to be really careful and very, very judicious, because there's going to be a period where things get weeded out and narrowed down.
Mm.
And so therefore, just be careful.
Yeah. Yeah. So you became the CEO of MetricStream in 2003,
Mhm.
and Vinod Khosla recruited you as the to MetricStream. So what do you think he saw in you? Why was he excited?
Oh, that's a really good question. You have to ask him. But I think it was a couple things. One, I have a lot of I have a lot of courage. And at the time it was called Zaplet that became MetricStream, and it was very, very broken. So it's not a job for the faint of heart, right? If you will. I had a track record at that point. I came with very good references on things I had done. I built my ability to lead and to inspire teams. All so I think all of that, right, helped in terms of his choosing me. Um, it was, he's an amazing investor, has had an incredible track record. And so it was a wonderful opportunity to be able to work in one of his companies.
And when you joined MetricStream, he also said to you, "You better be right." Why
Oh
do you
yeah, you might. So here's the story. So
that?
the story is, as I'm interviewing for the
Yeah.
job now, Vinod is one of those people I call scary smart,
Wow.
right? I mean, just he just is, and it's a combination of pure horsepower combined with the fact that he has the ability to see, touch, and get engaged with so much in such a broad range that
Yeah.
all those data points, right, come in, and then so therefore he's just scary smart.
Yeah.
And so when I was doing my research on him, I was like, okay, smart, great investor, right? But he can be really tough. And sometimes they called it whipsaw CEOs in companies, because every time you talk to him, he's a different, better idea. Because
Mm.
again, he's smart, he's all these data points.
Yeah.
But as a CEO, you need to be able to have your strategy. If you're constantly moving your strategy, I call
Mm.
it being whipsawed,
Yeah.
it's hard to actually execute successfully. And so a lot of CEOs don't last very long working for
Right.
Fidelity. So I'm like, ooh, okay. So in my last interview with him, when I knew he was going to be making me an offer, he did indeed offer me the job. And before I accepted, I said, Vinod, I just have one question. Are you hiring me to be CEO of the company, or are you hiring me to implement your vision for the
Mm.
company?
Yeah.
Right. And I'll be candid, that was one of the hardest things I've ever done, because Vinod can be very intimidating. I mean, here's, all the things he's done, Midas touch, this, that, I mean, everything, right? And here I am basically putting this question to him. And when I said it, I shut up, right? And he looks at me and looks at me. And for me, it seemed like half an hour. It wasn't, it was probably 30 seconds, right? But then he said, I am very forceful and I have strong opinions, but I hire CEOs to run the company. And I
Right.
said, okay, then I accept. So what happened, therefore, was he indeed gave me the ability to run the company. And there were times, though, when I could tell he didn't want me to do what I was doing, right? And once, literally, it was so different that what he said to me was, okay, right? Meaning, here's what I'm going to do. I don't agree with it, but okay, but you better be right. Right.
Mm.
And that's one of those things where if you're not right, realize you're out of the job.
Mm.
And I understand that, and I'll take that risk. Well, MetricStream is still around today,
Yeah.
so and a market leader. So anyway, so it worked out just fine. But yes, in your career, you need to remember that it is your career.
Yeah.
It is your career. It's not somebody else's. So you need to make the decisions that you believe are best. And if you're running a business, if you're a CEO of a company, again, your job is to set strategy and to execute that strategy in a way that delivers the returns that shareholders expect. You take inputs, absolutely. But you can't just blindly follow what other people tell you to do, because if you do, then you're not really running your company.
Right.
Right. And it takes courage, because sometimes you're not going to be right. And you got to be able to live with those consequences.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as part of MetricStream itself, you also said that it is important to take large risks. And
Mhm.
how large can these risks be? And how do you know that the risks that you're taking are large enough?
Oh, gosh. Yeah, that's a multi-million-dollar question, right? Um, what I will tell you is risk and reward are two sides of the same coin. So if
Right.
you're only taking little risks, you're just going to get little reward.
Mhm.
And very few investors are paying you to take little risk, because
Right.
they're expecting a lot more than just a little reward. So how do you know it's enough of a risk? I don't know that you ever know until it's done. But the question to ask yourself when you're looking at risk, what I ask myself is, okay, what's the likely outcome of taking this action? What's the best that could happen? And what's
Mm.
the worst that can happen? And can I live with that? Right? Because you don't want to just jump off a cliff because there's a diamond at the bottom. And so you feel if you get to the bottom, you'll get that diamond, you win, because odds are really high you're going to die before you get the diamond. Right? So as you look at that, that's what I always ask myself. What's likely? What's the best? And then what's the worst? And is it that right? Is it the right trade-off? And if so, you move forward. At MetricStream, we had a number of times. There were just a bunch of big risks. We had so many challenges. So the first really big one was just changing how we were approaching just the overall technology and the space that we were going after.
Hmm.
Right. So those were both big, big decisions. And one of those decisions was one of his questions on You Better Be Right. And then when you go after brand new spaces that don't exist, we were going after governance, risk, and compliance before it was called, coined, or even identified as governance, risk, and compliance. We called it comprehensive compliance and risk initially until we worked with the analysts and got this thing named. But when you're going after a new space, there are no proof points. You can't say, oh, we're going to be just like X, or you're just like Y. So you have to create a vision that is so clear that people that are working for you really understand what it is that you're trying to do. And then you have to be able to evangelize it in the marketplace. That's hard. And it is risky because every day you're spending money to do it. And if you're evangelizing, you're not getting the money the next day, right? You're getting it later.
Yeah,
So anyway, but hey, it all paid off.
absolutely. Now, consolidating learnings from all your experiences, we have a question from Sylvia Sowedo, who's the
Mhm.
CEO of the Girl Scouts of the USA and is also on the board of Qualcomm and Credo. Um, Shellye, throughout your career, you've undoubtedly encountered situations where you've had to make tough decisions that impacted both your team and organization. Can you share a memorable decision that you've had to make and how you arrived at it and what you learned from the experience in terms of leadership and decision making?
Ah, well, I'll go back to the MetricStream story. So one of the big decisions was MetricStream had created software that was designed to help with collaboration and decision making by trying to leverage the email technology to make it actionable. It's a
Right.
really simple way of saying it. And they had spent, millions of dollars to create this. And that's the whole premise of which they raised money and everything else. And I get there and, it's not working. They're
Mm,
not getting new customers, right? It's really, they're not growing, which is why I was hired and all this kinds of stuff. So how do you tell people who just spent years of their lives creating something that they really believed in and tell them, you know what? It's not going to work, right? That's really hard because what you don't want to do is demoralize everybody so that then they're not engaged to do what you need them to do. So it's a really fine line of leadership. And so what I did was it's positioning it. So I came and it was one of the very first talks I gave to the team because I said, you guys have built an amazing product, right? Which they had. I said, but one of the things that happened along the way is you fell in love with your product.
mm,
And when you fall in love with your product, then it's like falling in love with your baby. I mean, nobody can tell you your baby's ugly,
mm,
right? Nobody can. Because, oh, you just haven't seen her. Look how she chirps, right? Look at this little, oh, no. You just need the light to be a little better. No, look at me, right? Nobody can tell you. You're going to say, oh, no, you defend it. You defend it, right? And then if you love your baby, you're going to do absolutely everything. You're going to try to anticipate the needs. Are they warm enough? Do they this? Oh, this is happening. They start, right? You're very much engaged and focused and, okay. When you put all that attention on your product, then you become very product centric and you kind of forget the market.
mm.
You forget the market. And when you're talking to the market, you say, oh, no, you're just not using it right. Oh, no, you just need more training. Oh, no, you just need, you right? This it's great. No. What you need is to fall in love with your market. Because when you fall in love with your market, you're now anticipating your market's needs. You're now paying attention to every little nuance and every little development. And now everything you bring to it, your products, your offerings, right? You're trying to make perfect for you get the difference? So what I said to the team is, guys, you've fallen in love with your product, right? Which I don't fault you for. It's understandable because you've built something terrific. But unfortunately, in the process, you've lost sight of the market.
Mm.
We need to fall in love with the market so that
Right.
we can evolve our product to meet all the needs of the market. So what I did was I acknowledged what they'd done,
Right.
right? And then I put it in perspective, was very empathetic with how, that can happen where we are, but I also gave a path for how we get to where we need to be. Leadership is communications, clarity, the ability for people to see what they're doing and how it ties to where you're going, it's just critical in leadership. And that's probably
Young leaders often do not um, really look into the softer aspects of leadership as much early on in their careers. At least I did not when I was at Anme, the women's health company. I was in a very banking mindset of, you do things, you get the results, etc., etc. But it was when my mentor coached me, and he said that you really have to. These are human beings that you're dealing with, and you have to take the softer aspects into account as well. And so, yeah, it's great to hear that you faced a similar situation, and there's so much to learn from your example.
exactly one of the things I learned from a mentor early on is you become a manager by title,
Right,
but you become a leader when people follow you.
right,
And it's very different.
yeah, yeah. So, Shellye, you've interacted with Vinod Khosla, of course, but Mark Andreessen and Ben Horowitz as well. So they are the top investors, technology investors in the world. So, from your angle, what do you think makes them successful?
Goodness. It's all different. They're each very unique people. So I don't think there's one thing in terms that makes people successful. I do think there's a common thread, and the common thread across is they all like to win, and they all like to. They all three of them are very focused in staying very close to what's happening in the marketplace, to trends, right? To activities, to people, to listening and absorbing, etc. So they're all three of them. Those are two things for sure that I would say goes across, but they're all very individual people.
What does your daily routine look like?
So this I call my phase two. So
Okay.
phase one, 24 hours always on, right? Everything else. So phase two for me is all about impact and inspiration, frankly. I've decided that if I'm not impacting something or someone or inspiring someone, then I'm probably not going to do it. So where I'm spending my time these days is serving on boards, both for-profit, public, as well as nonprofit, because I can help impact organizations that way. I also spent time writing a book and trying to share on social media and speaking and everything else, just a lot of what I've learned, because one of my areas of passion is really helping other people develop.
Right.
I feel very frustrated that there is so much potential out there in the world, and most people don't get the opportunity to actually contribute even just 50-60% of their capability. And it's not because they're not working hard, and it's not because they're not smart, right? And it's not because they aren't ambitious, but a lot of times it's because they don't get opportunity, or they hit a roadblock or stumbling block and don't know how to get past it, right? I mean, it's those things. So if we can help eliminate or reduce those things, and if we could get most people to be able to contribute to 75%, not even 100 of their capability, just imagine, right, what this world could be. So that is one of my passion areas. So I spend a lot of time on that.
I think one thing that you emphasized, which is pretty interesting, is networking, the power of networking. And, I'd love to sort of get a sense of how networking has changed from when you started your career to what you see now, and how people are, going about it, and what are you really excited about?
Yeah, it's interesting. So networking, when I started my career, was all about personal touch. It was personal touch. Networking was going places where you could see people, actually shake hands, right? The whole bit was very much a personal touch. And now networking can be so many
Yeah.
different elements, right? You can indeed create relationships with people that you've never met in person, right? So I think what that's done is it's actually made networking and access more ubiquitous, right, than it was before, which I think is a good thing, because so much happens as a result of networks and networking. And before, a lot of people were excluded from different elements of that because of that personal touch need. So I think it's actually improved in some ways. But in other ways, it only improves if you network properly.
Mm.
Networking is not how many names you have in your phone database,
Right.
right? I mean, that's not networking.
Yeah.
Networking means that you actually have created
Mm.
relationships, which is two-way, value two ways, right? And it's through those relationships that someone would do something for you if you needed help or support when it's not convenient. Now, it's easy to get help when it's convenient. Oh, I'm going there anyway, right? So it's fine. But when
Yeah.
it takes a little bit of time, it's like, wait, you want me to make a call and my busy schedule and the whole bit? Well, when
Yeah.
somebody will actually do that, that's a real relationship. So it's really about building, depth of relationship, um, much more so than just who have you met.
Hmm. And how do you build that relationship? Because what I'm hearing is that if everyone has access to networking, then it's very important to stand out. And this is essentially something that I keep thinking about, even as an investor, because everyone has access to everything, every person. But how do you sort of build those relationships that you're talking about? And how do I be consistent in doing so?
Yeah. I always go back to Maya Angelou's quote, and I'm just going to paraphrase, right? People forget what you say, they'll forget
Mhm.
what you do. They
Right.
won't forget how you made them feel.
Ah, right.
So when it comes to networking,
Mm.
so much of it is around how are you adding value or communicating or doing things in a way that people feel touched, and you can't see it on the screen, but I'm touching my heart, right? They feel touched. And you'd be surprised. People are less, um, what's the word I want to call it? People show gratitude a lot less today than
Mm.
they've done in the past. So you actually show gratitude,
Yeah.
you'd be surprised just that, right, can make people remember you. It's little things. Maybe people listening to this podcast, right, and they don't know you personally, but as a result of something they heard, they were like, "Ooh," right? It gave them an idea for something they did. Okay, if they took the time to send you a direct message and say, Shreya, I've listened to this podcast. And as a result of the podcast, I took this step and this really helped me. I can't tell you how impactful this was to me.
Yeah.
Now, Shreya, how do you feel when you read that message?
Great. My morning's made.
Exactly. Do you
Yeah,
think you'll respond back to that person?
absolutely. Yeah.
Right. And so do you think now that's the very beginning of a relationship? You
Right.
don't know that person, you haven't met that person, but that person made you feel a certain way. If they sent you another note, you're probably more likely to read it
Right.
than all the other things that come through, right? Networking is not hard. Networking is really about just taking the time, being intentional, right? And establish a relationship. It's the same thing you would do. I mean, if your mother did something nice for you, you would actually say thank you, right? Of course you would. But in business, we don't do that very much.
Right.
It just comes, we assume, we keep going.
Mm.
So I don't think networking is hard. I think networking just means taking the time, being intentional, showing gratitude, and then offering to help people. There's simple ways to create these relationships. When you say stand out, to me, no, it's not. People do things for brand. Oh, let me dye my hair purple and everybody will remember who I am. Okay, they'll remember who you are. That doesn't mean that they'll actually want to do business with you.
Right. 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 And then, I think in one of your interviews, in fact, with David McCormick from Bridgewater, you mentioned that one way to identify whether people are resilient is to understand how they grew up. How did your upbringing make you unapologetically ambitious and resilient?
Oh gosh. Well, growing up, I had a challenged, I had a challenged experience. My father didn't have a college degree. I mentioned that earlier. And when he got married, they had four kids. Boom, 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 boom. Four kids in 5 years. And so he was always looking at how does he improve, his earnings and his ability to support his family. So we moved around a lot. They were very focused on education. So we always try to get a house in a place that had the best schools,
Right.
which meant that I was typically one of the only Black people in the school districts in which I was. And as a result, I got bullied. I got beat up. It was not good. And so just surviving that It made me resilient. My big thing my parents would tell me was, Shellye, you can't control what people say to you, and you can't control what people do to you, but you can control how you respond.
Right.
Don't let them win. And
Hmm.
what my mother, in particular, what she meant by don't let them win is they win if they change or impact how you feel about yourself or what you want to do. So you own that. And it became one of those mantra things, right? It's like, okay, because I mean, trust me, over my decades of growing up in business, everything else, I've been told, I've heard, I've been treated a lot of different ways. And if I just accepted all that stuff, oh my God, I would have been weighted down and not been able to move, right? So you have to be able to create tools for yourself that allow you just to keep moving, right? Despite what's happening there. So you can't control what people say to you. You can't control what people do to you. You can control how you respond. So don't let them win. Don't let them in your head.
That's a lot of Zen thinking, right from childhood. So we're only learning that now. Well, thank you. Bye.
Okay. Bye bye.